It is important for writers of every stripe to read as widely as they write. Our reading choices often reflect our preferences. This month's guest host provides a mix of classical lit, fantasy, vintage horror, and Canadian lit. I'm your host, Garrett K. Jones, and for the first Top 10 segment, I have returning author Brad Dunne presenting his personal book recommendations. Hey, welcome to The Right Way, where we talk book recs, author interviews, and writing tips. With the month of October in full effect, we're going to be dealing with some elements of horror, magic, and a bit of spookiness. Ooh. Just so you're aware, here are a list of things to be looking out for this month. I have a live stream coming up on Saturday, October 22nd, that has me providing a lecture at the Hanford Library. That opportunity will be found on Instagram. Now, if you're a Star Wars fan, you can connect with me and my buddies John, Mark, and Will at the War of the Stars, a Star Wars podcast. We talk about all things Star Wars, from the original trilogy to the prequels, the sequels, and everything in between. New episodes come out weekly, so make sure to subscribe to that podcast wherever that you find your podcast, whether it's Google, iTunes, or Spotify. My first guest host is an author I connected with during Season 4. Brad is a horror and suspense fantasy writer from Canada, and I'm pleased to bring him back on the show to provide his personal top 10 reading recommendations.
My name is Brad Dunne. I'm an author from Newfoundland, Canada. I write mostly supernatural horror, and today I'm going to give you my list of top 10 books. While I am a horror author and I read a lot of horror fiction, I do try to read, a variety of books, and for as a reader and to use as a writer for my influences. So I wanted my list to reflect that. So yeah, let's get to it. Number 10 is Redwall by Brian Jacks. This is a YA kind of fantasy novel with mice as the heroes and other animals, and they have to fight against some rats who are trying to invade the kingdom of Redwall. And the main character has to kind of solve this prophecy to find an ancient sword to defeat the rats. Very cool. Got all the classic fantasy tropes, and great for that reader and all for that age group and all ages. Number 9 is The Orenda by Joseph Boyden. This is historical fiction for kind of early 17th century Canada during the colonial period, particularly with the French, also the English coming into Quebec and Ontario. Also, I just want to mention that there's been some controversy with the author Joseph Boyden, who claimed some Indigenous heritage, which is apparently not legitimate. I don't really want to weigh in here, but I just wanted to bring that up. Number 8 is Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This Haunting of Hill House probably has the best opening sentence and paragraph to just about any novel out there. Beautiful prose from Jackson, and I love how ambiguous the story is. We're never quite sure if the haunting is actually happening or if this is all just inside the main character's head, and I love that ambiguity. Number 7 is The Corrections by Jonathan Franzen, a bit more of a more recent novel. I think early 21st century, maybe 20 years ago, it was published. Like Jackson, Jonathan Franzen's a great writer. The level is prose. Also a great exploration of kind of the modern family, particularly like an American family. Um, just really explores the psychology of these characters, and which I love. Number 6 is Colony of Unrequited Dreams by Wayne Johnston. This is a Newfoundland author. It's a Newfoundland historical fiction. My home, Newfoundland. It's set in kind of the mostly 20th century, but the midpoint around probably the 1940s, when Newfoundland actually joined Canada. So it's an interesting time of history. And if you're ever curious about Newfoundland history, then I would highly recommend this novel. Number 5 is Metamorphoses by Ovid. I love ancient Greek, Rome, Latin text, mythology, philosophy, poetry. I chose Metamorphoses just because this is probably my favorite if I were to pick one. It's really kind of like a short story anthology, a lot of different little stories about people turning into animals or trees or even like ponds in some cases. And it's very accessible. So if you were looking to take a bit of a deep dive into these kind of ancient texts, then I think this is a great place to start. Number 4 is Indian Horse by Richard Wagamisi. This is probably my favorite Canadian novel by a Canadian novelist. Basically, the story is about a kid who's a hockey prodigy. He has like Wayne Gretzky's talent, but grows up in a residential school. So it really dives into that history and about how he tries to overcome the trauma of what he experienced as he tries to rise through the ranks of hockey. Number 3 is my favorite horror novel, It by Stephen King. I read this novel probably when I was like 14 years old, and it just blew me away. Like, I didn't even know you were allowed to publish this kind of stuff. The details are so grisly, and while there is kind of the horror and the violence of the story, I think King in this novel really nails kind of like the loneliness of childhood, but also the nostalgia as an adult without kind of having the rose colored glasses, and reading, when I first read it, I really identified with the kids. And then as an adult, when I reread it, I really rediscovered it as an adult. And if you've only seen the movies and really enjoyed them, I highly recommend you owe it to yourself to read the books, because it's a clinic for horror writing. And the last 200 pages of this book are a roller coaster, man. Like, King is just in full control of his powers. This is incredible. Number 2 is Lord of the Rings by Tolkien. I discovered The Hobbit when I was like maybe 13 years old, and it really hooked me it was probably the most impactful book in terms of converting me into a lifelong reader as a kid. And I read it when I was sick from school. I had pneumonia, I remember, and my mom brought me The Hobbit, and I just devoured it in like 2 sittings. Like, that episodic kind of pacing is so addictive to read, and then if you come away with it wanting more, then Lord of the Rings gives you that just like deeper, expansive look into the world. And not only was Tolkien a genius in terms of his imaginative powers to create these settings in mythology, but I think he's an underrated writer just in terms of his prose. He writes beautifully, and also economically. Like, yeah, Lord of the Rings has a reputation for being this massive, trilogy, but like in total, I think maybe it's about maybe 1,200 to 1,500 pages. And man, there's fantasy books out there nowadays that don't accomplish nearly what he did in the same amount of real estate, right? So great pacing, great writing, just an extraordinary. Number 1, which may be surprising, is Ulysses by James Joyce. This book has a reputation for being very difficult, very academic, very dense. And yeah, those are to a certain extent true, but I also think that is very grounded in a lot of ways. If you're unfamiliar, it's basically the story of an Irishman who goes through Dublin throughout one day, June 16th, and kind of recreates the episodes of the Odyssey, hence Ulysses. I love this book as an author because it's really a clinic in terms of what you can accomplish with form, you know, when, say, let's say Bloom, Leopold Bloom's main character, he's in a butcher shop, like the language will start making kind of analogies and metaphors using meat, and another chapter, there's the Cyclops episode where he encounters a one-eyed man who has a patch over his eye, and not only is he like literally like kind of only he's kind of blinded, but metaphorically also he's blinded by his own sense of Irish ethno-nationalism and xenophobia. So Joyce finds all kinds of interesting ways to play with the mythology versus everyday life. And so if you are curious, I would recommend just diving in. Don't worry too much about trying to nail all the nuances of the book. It's something that I keep coming back to throughout my life. And, I always find something new about it each time I read it and pick at it. Right. So it's really become a lifelong friend for me, and it's really impacted me as a writer. So those are my top 10 books. Hopefully I've convinced you to check out some of them. Cheers.
If you're interested in connecting with Brad through social media or getting a hold of copies of his work, you can find those links down in the video description. Hey, thanks for watching. Please hit like, hit subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications on new videos. You can support the channel on Patreon and the merch store. Those links can be found in the video description. Make sure to tune in next week for the first Season 5 Author Awareness segment featuring an interview with memoirist Shannon Gonyu. See you then.